But can you? Can you hear me? Cryptwalker says nope, which
Can hear
suggests
you.
they can hear me, but not you.
Indeed. All right. I got it here. And I see that I need to kill some stream data too while I'm at it. How's that?
So I'm listening to Param. Oh, they can hear you now.
Wonderful. Let me try this again. And we're back.
This is Geek Together, the No Direction Network's positively geeky podcast where a couple of geeks get together and talk about whatever's on their geeky minds. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
And this week, like we do Geek Together regularity anymore, this time we are talking Essence 20.
Essence 20? What that?
Come on, Param. Don't you read Forbes?
I know, I've got to be the audience surrogate.
It was recently announced that the name of the role-playing system that Renegade Game Studios' Hasbro licensed RPGs will run on is Essence 20. And as one of the co-designers of Essence 20 and the author, or one of the authors on the G.I. Joe core rulebook, I am very excited to talk about Essence 20. And I talked about it on a couple of G.I. Joe podcasts, and then I realized we haven't really done a network-dedicated episode to it. But here we are. We had this Geek Together scheduled, which often just kind of goes by without anything being recorded. So this week it's like, no, let's take the time. We've got it carved out. Let's talk about Essence 20 and how exciting this whole situation is.
It kind of is exciting because you helped make a thing with a team of awesome people, and you helped make a thing that you might be uniquely qualified to help make.
Oh, Pam, when I was writing the cover letter and revising my resume to apply for this job, I was like, this is what I was born to do. The crossover of G.I. Joe, or the Hasbro properties in general, but G.I. Joe most especially, and role-playing games is just two of my main passions, two of what I'm most out there on the internet talking about. So yeah, when it was announced and it was vaguely alluded to that there would be a G.I. Joe RPG, I used every network connection that I've built up, every RPG industry network I had, connection I had. I talked to a friend at Hasbro to get him to be a contact on my resume. I did absolutely everything that I was like, they would be fools to say no once they got this resume.
And did you cackle maniacally going, fools, fools?
No, I think I was just taken aback like, man, I'd hire me. Look at that resume. That is amazing.
I was definitely giggling gleefully when you told me about it. And I was like, yes, perfect. This is the perfect sequence of events. I mean, you kind of like G.I. Joe a little bit.
Who? Me?
Yeah.
Karam, look at me. You've even got a widescreen this time for this.
I know.
Layout on Twitch. Look at that. So much G.I. Joe glory. Oh, actually, we haven't really shown off. I put up my art in that corner. There's still some spaces, so I'm thinking about it. But like, I've got the Guy Cassidy print of the Persuader, along with some original backstop art. That's all in my backstop corner. I've got the David Willis Robo Joe versus Destro piece. I've got Sergeant Slaughter against Cobra Commander and Hulk Hogan.
Mm-hmm. And those aren't just pretty background collectibles anymore. Those are now game accessories.
It's so true, and it's so exciting. So, Param, I don't know. Where do you want to begin? Do we talk about the game? Do we talk about G.I. Joe? What?
Well, let's do what is Essence 20, and why is it its own thing? You all have a RPG system, and it's 3 games are going to launch for this thing, right?
3 games are launching for it. So the Power Rangers game is launching in January, G.I. Joe in February, Transformers in March. That is all tentative because there is a shipping crisis in the world. So shipping crisis aside, that is the plan. And then it's already been announced that there will be a My Little Pony RPG that will also be running on Essence 20. So Essence 20 is the system. It is the mechanics that fuel all of these games. All of them have similar mechanics. Each one has its own unique mechanics to make sure you can tell the stories appropriate for that brand. But there is definitely crossover, and once you learn one of them, you'll be able to learn all the other ones fairly easily.
At first glance, they seem like very different genres until they don't actually. Where you've got military adventuring, you've got superheroes that pilot absolutely massive city-sized robots, and you've got medium to small-sized robots that turn into swimming pools.
Medium to small. They're bigger than that.
Have you looked at the scale of giant robots and realized how tiny Transformers actually are?
I mean, I guess the cassettes would be pretty small, and the guns.
I mean,
and a
Optimus
regular-sized
Prime
car.
comes up to the knee of a Gundam. I mean, it's
Fair
like, and the
enough.
Gundam's not even a very big robot compared to the giant robot fandoms. The Megazord could, like, squish Optimus with its finger.
So when we were working on Essence 20, like very early on, it's like, we know we have these brands. We know it has to be the same system for all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So how are we going to make sure that they're all balanced off of each other? How are we going to make sure that they all run the same way and yet are still true to their brands? And so we knew we wanted to do like this 3-part character creation thing, but we didn't know exactly what the elements were going to be and how we could make them malleable enough that they can apply to different systems. So I say we because there was a team of like 10, 12 designers. Let me pull up the list just to give everybody the credit they deserve. Not table of contents. Right. All right. Let me.
Yeah. And while you look that up,
Go for it.
While you're looking that up, I've also noticed that the list of things that are running on the Essence 20 all seem to have a very Aquamarine style connection to each other.
What does Aquamarine mean?
Hasbro's logo.
Oh, is that what you were going for? Okay. Yes, they are all Hasbro properties. Yes. So
that's all I'm just saying.
You not know that Hasbro bought Power Rangers from Saban, who at one point sold it to Disney, got it back from Disney in like an unprecedented. Disney never lets go of their licenses, but in this case, they sold them back to Saban Entertainment, and then Saban sold it to Hasbro, who are the owners. So it's not like Hasbro is licensing Power Rangers from anybody. Power Rangers is a Hasbro property now.
Okay. Honestly, Hasbro, and not Hasbro, but Power Rangers is interesting situations with like really awesome licensing, especially in the more modern times Power Rangers, the more recent series, where like originally, yeah, you did have that concept where they just take footage from the old show and then they just like added completely different B plots with the teenagers with the American actors. But eventually it got to the point where they were like the show's storylines just are the same, and they would just film together and pay for the budgets together for the production, and then just like film the same scene at the same location by just, okay, Asian actors out, American actors in.
Oh, is that how it was?
Yeah.
How the later seasons were working?
Yeah,
cool.
Which was really cool. And which is a lot of the fandom's favorite seasons are the later seasons, because like the Super Sentai stuff is still aimed at kids, but it definitely has a different tone to some of the slapstickness that we were introduced to with the early Power Rangers. And then like there's some really cool one. There's some, while you're looking, there's like another, like Saban also, this went backwards once with one of their properties, and I kind of hope that Power Rangers will let me play in this space too, with the Gridman license, where they license Gridman is a Sentai show where they go into computers, and when they licensed it to the States, Saban did what Saban always did and got a bunch of American high schoolers to be the new cast, and so
the VR Troopers?
Yeah, they became VR Troopers. No, not VR Troopers. Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad.
Okay.
A different show. VR Troopers are a different crew. Same thing. But Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad had like a really unique twist to it, and the villain was actually kind of a little bit more ruthless and evil than we're used to in the Saban property. And there was a lot of fandom. I was a huge fan of that show, even though it was like only got like a fraction of the attention and budget and time that Power Rangers got. And so were the creators. And now they've begun to release new anime based on that version of the universe, not the
Cool.
original Gridman universe, called SSSS Gridman, which stands for Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad Gridman, where instead of the original Sentai characters, it's Japanese high schoolers that have to step into the role.
Cool.
And the anime is super good. So I'm kind of hoping that Power Rangers is flexible enough to let me play in all the Sentai wonderfulness.
Well, now, I know that you don't know anything about the system, but
nope.
Knowing the idea that this is a Power Rangers RPG, do you think it should just be flexible enough that you can just do an SSSR?
I mean,
of your own?
It should be, because all the Sentai shows kind of have a similar idea. I am random Joe person that is likely a teenager who is likely doing things, or I might be teenager adjacent and helping. And then some powerful being or random circumstance mentor character gives me superpowers that lets me turn into a ranger type character. I then get to summon a robot.
Away from the screen for a second, Param. You keep talking, I'll be back in 2 seconds.
And then I get to pilot the giant robot. Or in Gridman, it's kind of like a tiny little inside a computer robot.
So to reference something that I knew I had a prop for just out of reach, so I had to go grab it. Go on.
So like, then eventually the fight escalates and I have to get in my giant robot and then we fight. But sometimes the giant robot is a microscopic robot, but the same concept applies. If I can't do that in the Power Rangers RPG, it failed. Sorry.
All right, so Lulu in chat is saying Mask when, and that's Mask, the Mobile Armored Strike Command. And so there is a lot of stuff like what you're talking about and like Mask that is like adjacent to these properties. So here's Matt Tracker, released as a G.I. Joe on a card art with the Mask logo on it.
Oh my gosh, so, I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like, it's more than just these are close-knit properties that are all owned by Hasbro. Like literally Mask and G.I. Joe has crossed over to the point that Mask has a G.I. Joe action figure. But as licensees, we have to be a little bit careful about which directions we go and what assumptions we make about what we can do with someone else's properties. And so if we ever wanted to incorporate something from Mask into G.I. Joe or release it as its own RPG, it would probably be a separate property, or at very least, it would be a conversation with Hasbro. So it would be the same thing as you were talking about with like VR Troopers and the other Saban released. I forget what that genre is called, but basically
Sentai.
Power Rangers. Yes, there we go.
Super Sentai is the genre.
So,
which also includes Sailor Moon, technically, even though Sailor Moon is often considered Mahi Shoujo, but Sailor Moon isn't actually a Mahi Shoujo. It's a Sentai show with an all-girl cast.
Well, Saban produced all those shows, sold some rights to Disney, got some rights back, sold it to Hasbro. Who owns what is probably pretty up in the air. Who is willing to fight for some of the things that are lesser than, like, smaller properties than Power Rangers? Probably nobody, but still, it's just, it's a delicate balance. So the same thing that Hasbro owns GoBots, and they have released GoBots as like a sub-brand of Transformers.
Right.
But we can't just assume Psykill and Leader 1 could be used in the Transformers role-playing game. I know.
If I can't have Psykill, what's the point?
I have fond memories of Zod, the purple non-transforming T-Rex thing from GoBots, who just, like, you put the batteries in and he would just slink up and down and you poked him in the button on his chest and he would stop. And they worked that into multiple episodes of the cartoon, which is just glorious. And anytime Zod showed up on the cartoon, it was like, everybody stop everything. Zod is here. We got to deal with Zod.
There was a department store closure in my area where they discounted their toy section. And my parents went to that store and bought hundreds of GoBots. But they didn't give them to me right away. The GoBots became in a closet. And every time I did something good, like get a good grade on a report card or get all my chores done early or something, I would be rewarded with a GoBot. And I have glorious, fond memories of pulling out GoBots.
What's that behind your ear? Oh! I was going to say a GoBot name, but I used all the GoBot names I know. Zod, Leader 1, and Psykill. So, what we were talking about earlier. So, when we were talking about how we were going to make the system so that it can apply to multiple different brands that have their own storytelling needs, I set out and said, like, okay, so knowing the parameters that it has to be these three things, the one's small, one's medium, and one's huge, how are we dividing these up? And so I came up with the influences, origin, and role terms. Or actually, role was something that I was given because we couldn't use class, and we really definitely needed something in the class space that's like, this defines you across the entire campaign. So role was given to me, but influence and origin were mine. And it was like, here's the three properties, or the four properties I know we have. Here's if we wanted to do this as a superhero game. Here's if we wanted to do this as a Paw Patrol game. Just like showing like the extent, the flexibility of this system and doing it under this. So influence is something that it defines your personality, and it's pretty system agnostic. And really, just once you get the three rule books, you could choose influences across all three games, and it will not feel weird or muddied or anything. So origin is probably the most. Oh, go for it.
Go for it. I was going to ask you a question that kind of would like help explain this to me. Like when I'm playing the one, I'll go with the one you're probably most familiar with, the G.I. Joe game. Okay, and like, is it not possible to not be playing G.I. Joe, but some other military pseudo organization going up against some other military pseudo terrorist group?
Sure. So it would still have the military fantasy and concept futurism tone to it. Lava Being in chat is saying Action Force. Sure, if you wanted to make this Action Force and have them go against the Red Shadows, absolutely, that's a viable option. You can even do no, I had another example, but I've lost it. But anyway, yes. So if you wanted to completely take the G.I. Joe out of it, I mean, in so much as any like if you want to do Rambo Freedom Force, if you wanted to do something based on the Rambo animated series, totally viable.
Or why
would you want to?
Well, if you like the style of G.I. Joe, but want to tell your own story, like, you're the key of not wanting to play pre-published adventures in pre-published campaign settings. There's a lot of G.I. Joe I love, and I love a lot of their tangent stuff, like Renegades and some of the other shows where you take the basic concept and then flip some core assumption, and that's where you get some fun stories.
Yeah, so Renegades, and then there's the G.I. Joe comic with no subtitle that came out recently, and there was the 2 episodes of the original series called Worlds Without End, are all the idea that Cobra is the authority. Cobra runs the United States, and G.I. Joe is the scrappy, the rebels. It's basically kind of the Star Wars formula, in that G.I. Joe are the rebels trying to take out the system, and the system is Cobra. And so even though any of the flavor that's in the core rulebook will be assuming G.I. Joe is the authority and Cobra are the terrorists and doing the bad things, you could easily just take the mechanics that are presented in the game and apply them to a Worlds Without End campaign.
But we're still making our own Joes. I don't have to decide that I'm a level 13 Snake Eyes, right?
Right. So we've got what's called the active roster, which is I think like 80 characters from the actual lore. And
that must have been hard narrowing it down to 80.
It was hard narrowing it down. So all right. So I'm the one that came up with the idea of having the active roster, and I'm the one that came up with the characters that would be on the active roster. And it has characters from every year that G.I. Joe has been active, but no one year has all of their characters represented. So even the original 13 Joes are not all on the list. Only about 6 of them are, and Rock and Roll just made the cut. But like, I had a couple of objectives. I wanted to have as many international Joes as possible, and like canonical international Joes. So a lot of the obscure Joes that are in there, you've got Skymate, the Australian glider commando. You've got Snowstorm, who is a Cuban Joe who came up with a protective armor to protect him against the cold because he hates being in the cold. But it ends up that he made this suit just for himself, and so they were like, well, we got to send you on these Arctic missions because we've recruited the suit. You are just the person that operates the suit.
Oh, this is a war machine
Backstop,
problem.
of course, made it as the only Canadian Joe. Big Ben is in there as our UK affiliate. So I wanted to make sure there were international Joes, and because it's part of like, if G.I. Joe is going to go to all the different countries of the world, it makes sense that they have these liaisons from these other countries to at least facilitate talking to the government, making sure it's not an American invasion of this country so that they can fight Cobra while they're there. And then I wanted a lot of diversity. And at first I was making calls like, okay, so Dial Tone was a female character in the G.I. Joe movie universe. And so let's go with the female version of Dial Tone. Doc was Carla Greer in one of the G.I. Joe reboots. And so let's go with female version of Doc, just because there's only like 5 identical female characters in the entire franchise. And like over the years, they've added more, but a lot of them are pretty obscure. So I was just like, all right, as long as it's canonical somewhere, they can't be like, oh, we're playing to diversity or whatever. Any of those arguments, I was like, no, we're doing that obscure comic. You're not a real fan. If you didn't know that Dial Tone was a girl in the G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra universe, have you been paying attention? But anyway, it ends up our license is called the Evergreen license, and it means we have to use the most universal version of the characters. And so we went back to male Dial Tone and male Doc. Oh, and I had General Hawk. I had him using a wheelchair, and partially because it has happened in the comics and in the movie, and partially so that Duke and Hawk have more separating them and their function on the team. But also, one of my favorite version of General Hawk is Jetpack General Hawk, and that flight suit could also be like a mobility suit. So anytime Hawk needs to go on missions, he just straps on the jetpack and he's flying around.
I mean, if you had a jetpack, you'd use it all the time.
I love jetpacks.
So let's go. So you mentioned there are 3 things that are important to a character, and you mentioned origin, role, and influences, right?
Yes. So influence is kind of like your background equivalent for Pathfinder, but applies differently in a couple of ways. One is that it could be at any point in your life, this is something that influenced you. So it's not just this is what you were at a specific point in your life. It's really just like if you had a really important pep talk when you were a child, you can get a certain influence. Or like if very recently you had something tragic happen to you that's just completely shifted the trajectory of your life, that also applies as an influence. And you can have up to 3 influences, but once you have more than one, you start getting hang-ups. So it all balances out. One influence, you just get the influence. A second influence, you get the hang-up with that. And my favorite example of how influence and hang-up works is Roadblock. So there's an episode of the original animated series where Roadblock is invited to Lifeline's sister's wedding. And Roadblock famously is a chef and like a lover of food and lover of fine cuisine. And so at one point he finds himself in the kitchen talking to the caterers. Now the caterers are undercover Cobra. And because of Roadblock's influence, he could have come across them and foiled their plan. But he goes straight to the food, starts bragging about being a chef, and they knock him out from behind. So that's an example of both an influence giving him an opportunity to move the plot in a very specific way, and his hang-up costing him an opportunity and making his, this influence on his life a distraction from his role as a character.
Oh, I'm curious as to how's that handled, because I had a GM once that handled something similar to that beautifully, where one of my characters in the game had the perfect spell for every situation and popped out the spell that basically ruined the entire plot. Like, I cast this spell, do this. Chapters 3 through 27 of this adventure no longer happen. You would have won. So instead, the GM handed me a note saying, "Congratulations, you beat the game. Now pretend you screwed it up. Here's a bonus."
Now, when he said handed to you, were you the player that had the spell for every situation?
Yeah. So the GM handed me the note that said, "Congratulations, you won the game." Yeah, he was like, "This paper is good for 1 free reroll. Pretend you didn't do that."
So I do not see the influences being as game breaking as having the perfect spell for every situation. It really is just when you're thinking about your character, think about them beyond what they're going to do in a fight scene, and that's really where influences get to play their major part in the system.
Somebody in chat called the adventure I did that on Vichita?
Civicada?
Yeah, Steve Akeda. Yeah, yeah. It was Eberron. Congratulations.
Shannon is a longtime listener and has an amazing memory for No Direction related anecdotes.
Mm-hmm.
So you've probably told the story before, and he knows exactly what story you're talking about.
Yes. So
So
origin
of
and
the
influences
three,
sound.
so we've only talked about influences so far. After that,
Mhm,
you've got origins, and origin is very specific to the game. So
mhm,
when for Power Rangers, your origin is your attitude, because the Power Rangers are all teenagers with attitude. And so your attitude defines why you were picked to be a Power Ranger. With G.I. Joe, it is what you were doing professionally that got you recruited to the G.I. Joe team. So you were probably in a military branch. So we've got all of the U.S. military branches with a lot of options within each to represent different countries and just different roles within the military. But then you could also be a civilian that caught the attention of G.I. Joe recruiters. So there's a lot of civilian options as well.
mhm.
Or you could just be trained with the Arashikage Ninja Clan. And then, of course, just being a ninja is the fast track to getting on the G.I. Joe team. And then in G.I. Joe, in Transformers, Origin is your chassis. So it
Ah,
is the what kind of vehicle you are, or what your alt mode is, because you don't necessarily have to be a vehicle, I believe. I know very little about the Transformers game,
mhm,
even though I know more about Transformers as a franchise than I know about Power Rangers.
mhm.
So I don't want to say anything that sets expectations, but I do know that the purpose of the Origin in Transformers is the chassis.
Mhm. This reminds me of the War for Cybertron video games that had maybe the coolest feature of any Transformer video game ever, which was the build your Transformer option. And yeah, that's that how you're basically your class of character was determined by what vehicle you turned into. So if you were a fast car, you were like the rogue character. If you were like the all the planes got to be like super speedy snipers, and of course like the big heavy trucks and or tanks were your tank role in the game in kind of
Okay,
situation.
yeah, but you didn't customize. There wasn't character creation. I've played these games.
No, yeah, there's character creation.
The War for Cybertron games.
Yes, yes, you have to go into
What?
multiplayer.
Oh, I never
Yeah.
did the multiplayer.
Yeah, and then you get to build and design and customize and color and then give your own logo to your own robot. And you have to build
That's really
when you
cool.
build your character, you have to pick the same class for both, but you build an Autobot and the Decepticons in case depending on which team you got dropped on. So
Oh,
you
okay,
played your character and it leveled up together, but you had to give it an Autobot name and a Decepticon name and then design the appearance of each.
very cool.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
loved
a
it.
whole chunk of that game that I missed out on. I really liked the first one. I did not care for the second one.
That is my experience.
Yeah, I liked the optics of the second one, but it was way too hard. Like I remember at one point I was playing and my shield was down to 0 and my health was at like 90%.
Mhm.
And I like just said to myself, all right, I'm almost gonna die. And then Tina was sitting in the same room with me and she's like, what are you talking about? You've got like 90% health. And then I got shot once and I died. And it's like, yeah, once your shield's down, you're
Mhm.
dead. So we do have a couple of questions in chat. We've got Lava Being says you can play as the A team. Yeah. G.I. Joe Renegades is basically the A team. I don't remember if A team had one central villain, that like a recurring villain, or if it was every episode was a one shot. But anyway, so it's like A team versus Cobra was what G.I. Joe Renegades was. Lava Being any of the kids from the PSAs. No, unless you want to be. Like they're not on the active roster, but if you want to be like one day Blowtorch leaned into my room and told me some advice on how to handle a fire in the house, that you don't touch the doorknob because it could have been heating up, and that's why I'm a GI Joe. Sure, that works.
You know, if
I'm
that
sure
had
there's
happened,
influences
I
that
sure as
makes
heck
sense.
would have been the G.I. Joe.
Yep.
You all saved my family. I owe you everything.
Raising Rude Lord says there's a UK GI Joe. Yeah, Big Ben. So on the animated series, the second one, the one by Geek, that after Sunbow lost the license because those movies cost them a lot of money. And so Deke was the second animation company that got the G.I. Joe license, and they were much faster and loose with the roster. So a character might show up in 2-3 episodes tops. And Big Ben was a character that showed up in a couple of episodes, and he was like a proper English gentleman. He also shows up in a couple of issues of the comic, and he is like a rough Cockney hooligan type character. So yeah, you can really play that character however you want. Justin Sluter, could you play Super Pilot Marlon Wayans? You can. Less said about Marlon Wayans as Ripcord, the better, but still, you could. Sluter's also asking if Space Force will be included. So there is a canonical G.I. Joe space team called Star Brigade. And they do have a famous spaceship called, oh, shoot, it's the Conquest, I think? Wow, I'm actually drawing a blank on that. But I will find that in a second. But anyway.
This isn't the Neon Age, right?
No, this is before the Neon Age. So
okay.
After the Flag, they released the big product every year. So it was the Flag, followed by the Terradrome, followed by, I think the Conquest might have been the next one. I think it's called the Conquest. They released it twice as two different names. And I think one of them was Defiant, one of them was Conquest. But Conquest was the big one. I'm just trying to find. So Hardtop is the one that came with it. He was the Defiant. Yeah, Defiant was... Oh, okay. So Defiant was the big one, and then Conquest was the smaller version of the same thing released a second time.
Oh gosh, I have sold so many of these in my store.
Yep.
I always giggle when I see one.
If you're looking at the box art, there's the three components. There's that giant like tower thing in the background, and then there's a big shuttle, and then there's a second shuttle on top of that, and then there was actually a third smaller shuttle that goes on the inside, which was just a white version of the drone craft that came with the Night Raven. So the Defiant is when it was all three components, and then it was released again as the Conquest when it was just that upper layer, the one that had the drone inside of it. And so my neighbor had that, and that was a massive ship. And I've only seen the whole thing all put together once, and it is a big chunk of it takes up a big footprint in your Joe room.
Yeah,
and there's very few Cobra things you can do to interact with it, and so that's why it's not in my collection.
The correct answer is you invade it. That's not a vehicle. That's a set.
Point. If G.I. Joe buys this gigantic vehicle and the only purpose is for Cobra missions, nah.
Oh.
Anyway.
Can we do that? Is that the possible? Can we Cobra against Joe?
What do you mean?
G.I. Joe.
Can you play as Cobra characters?
Yeah. Can we Cobra instead of Joe?
So, straight out of the core rulebook, yeah. If you just want to call things Cobra, the flavor assumes you're being heroic and you're doing good, but the mechanics could be applied equally to G.I. Joe and Cobra.
Dude, this is where we flip the script. Not flipping the script to where we're evil. We just changed Joe to evil.
Grey Wolf is telling me it's the Crusader, not the Conquest. Yeah, I don't really know the spaceships that well, so I will take your word for it.
Because I looked up the Conquest, and that is a Cobra jet.
The Conquest is a Cobra jet? Is the blue and gray one?
It's the red one.
Oh, the Conquest was Python Patrol's... the Conquest is also a G.I. Joe jet.
Oh,
it's Slipstream's jet. Yeah.
They loved repainting vehicles, didn't they?
No, it didn't happen that often, but every couple of years they started doing sets where it was just completely dedicated to repaint. So you did Tiger Force, you did Python Patrol, you did Sky Patrol. Sky Patrol was pretty clever about it because it was reused neck down, but then unique heads and unique accessories with them. So unless you really could spot a mold, you probably did not realize that this was 90% a reused figure. But then the vehicles were just same vehicles, but shiny now.
So you mentioned origin and you mentioned influences, but it sounds like role is the most important choice.
Yes. So when you're talking about Snake Eyes, if you're talking about influence, it's the fact that he, has a tragic backstory and that he, did some martial arts training, or I guess that would be more of his origin. But if you're talking about Snake Eyes, the Ninja Commando on the G.I. Joe team, then you are talking about his role. And so there are 8 roles in the game, and they cover a lot of classic tropes for RPG-type characters, and also cover as many different characters in G.I. Joe as we could think of. So the Commando, it covers snipers, spies, and what's the third focus?
Interesting use of Commando.
How so?
Well, like oftentimes when video games will use commando to be like just your running gunner, which is maybe not
Oh, no, no, no.
accurate.
This is Commando. Because Snake Eyes' original
Hmm.
primary military specialty was Commando. And so this is very much the Snake Eyes class. This is the rogue. This is the sneaky operative. You're trying to catch people off guard and take them out.
And honestly, that's probably more true to the military origin than the Hollywood version of these characters.
Well, what is G.I. Joe but true to the military?
So, Commando, what
Yeah.
are some other ones that you can tell us about?
Infantry.
Okay.
Yeah, so infantry is, it's your fighter type. It's the most flexible one. And the focuses include the medic, the artillery specialist, and let me see. So each class has 3 focuses, which is like a sub build that you can branch out. Artillerist, mechanized infantry. Oh yeah, mechanized infantry. That's the third one. So your vehicle driver, the one that is most comfortable behind the seat of a vehicle, because of course the game has quite a few vehicles.
Yeah,
and
I'm
extensive vehicle rules.
Totally going to be asking about that very soon.
All right. Next up, we have the martial artists, which too late in the process, I realized martial artists maybe would have been better served as a focus for the commando and not its own role. But here it is. It's got its own role. And the way we defined it is that it's got 3 schools. The Shadow School, which is about infiltration. The Storm School, which is about unarmed attacks. And Quick Kick is our example of the Storm School. And then the Wisdom School is like a very support-based martial artist. And I've even got a Lifeline build that is based on the support school, because there is a comic that talks about Lifeline's martial arts background. And he is not a ninja, but he does have a martial arts background, which, again, if you want to get into G.I. Joe, learn some martial arts. After that, we've got the officer. Officer, you've got the battlefield psychologist, the frontline leader, and the grandmaster. So psychologist very much about debuffing people. Grandmaster is a lot about tactics, and the frontline leader is somebody that can mix it up in the front with, they lead by example.
Is this where Duke would fit?
Duke and Hawk are both frontline leaders. Grandmaster is Keel Hall, Admiral Keel Hall. He's the one who came with the flag. And so I forgot about this. When I was writing this focus, it was like every single perk, which is our class features, every single perk is going to be a chess reference. And then I was going back and being like, all right, so now I need to see examples of my officers. Let's put Keel Hall in there, and I read his backstory, and it's like he moves the ships in his fleet like chess pieces on a board. And I'm like, well, there we go. That worked out. And Battlefield Psychologist is Psych Out, who is one of my favorite underrated G.I. Joes. He is the team psychologist. He messes with Cobra's heads on the battlefield, and he is also there for the mental well-being of the Joes back at the pit. So I actually expect him to be a reoccurring NPC in my games, because he is good to get exposition and character updates out of people. Next, we have the Ranger. So the Ranger is kind of a catch-all for a lot of the environment specialists and Joes with animals. So the 3 different focuses are Beastmaster, Predator, which is kind of like a commando, but in the wild, and then Scout. And as you're building your character, you are choosing whether you are really good at a single environment or if you apply your understanding of environments across multiple environments.
Okay. I'm suddenly realizing that this might be a game where I would want multiple characters per player.
So you know what? That's completely in line with G.I. Joe. I encourage people to do multiple characters for every PC, and then you assign it based on who you want, who is the best Joe for that role, for that mission, sorry.
Do you have your 80 Joes grouped by voice actor?
No, because that would be like 20 voice actors, Pam.
I know, but a lot less than 80 Joes.
Yes, a lot. Well, and also a lot of the characters on the list were never in animation, so they never had a voice actor. All right, next up, we've got the Renegade, which is our barbarian type. And so it includes all of Slaughter's Renegades from the animated movie, but also any rough around the collar Joes. So like Mutt. Mutt comes with Junkyard. He's the I think he was running security was his official thing. But one of the fun things about the action figure is that he came with a muzzle, but the muzzle fit on Mutt's face, not Junkyard the dog. And the idea was that of the two, Mutt is the one who is more likely to bite you. And so that is a great example of a renegade character, that he's tough, he's violent, and actually part of the lore that we established for this is that this was part of a program to find people that are at risk of being recruited to Cobra and bring them onto G.I. Joe before Cobra gets them first. Because even though they are not the most reliable Joe characters, they would be much worse as Joe enemies.
It's proactive recruiting.
And then, the next role. Gotta stop saying class. Next role is the technician, and I love the technician. This is one of the roles that I designed.
Does this get to be the man behind the chair?
I guess if you want to be. The technician actually started as a few different classes, a few different roles, and eventually we were like, nobody wants to play the cleric. Like, that's the situation we were in. We don't want an entire role dedicated to medic. We don't want a whole role dedicated to scientist. And so it was just like, all right, so if you want to be a weapon specialist, a skill specialist, an armor specialist, whatever kind of specialist you want to be, that's the technician. And then built up from there. And it is, so I designed the equipment chapter. And so after designing the equipment chapter, I designed technician, which is equipment chapter, the role. And so it is fun. It is finicky. It is definitely the headiest. Oh, sorry. And a drone. That is the fourth kind of primary technology you can have. Yeah. If you are a fan of like a more hands-on system, like Pathfinder, the technician is the class that is the role that is going to feel most comfortable to you. And finally, the Vanguard. So the Vanguard is kind of our Paladin equivalent. This is for characters that are very much leadership role when how they're depicted in media, but it is not strictly an officer type character. So Roadblock fits in there. Lady J is another example of that. And I threw Backstop in here because I like having Backstop represented as often as possible.
So this is a Captain America.
Yes, in fact, there is one of the Vanguard specialties is all about their shield. Let me see, what are the Vanguard focuses? Bodyguard, Heavy Ordnance, and Juggernaut. Oh, sorry, so the shield stuff is just part of their basic... they have a personal shield, which is like a projected shield. Oh, I know, sorry. Never mind. Forget I said anything about a Vanguard with a shield. That is not in the core rulebook. But yeah, so
never heard.
There we go. If you do not have an officer, or even if you do, the Vanguard is a good secondary character to have along with them.
All right, this sounds a lot more like classes than I thought they would. I thought this would be super verby.
No, so the roles very much are, of all the things in the game, roles are going to be the most familiar to players who know Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. It's a 20 level progression. Your perks, your class features are tied into your role. Some of them have subsystems where you get certain points that get to apply certain benefits in certain situations, like the Commando has basically sneak attack. And the roles also dictate how your essences, which are your ability scores, how they progress. So that is where things are different from what you might be used to. You don't have complete free reign on how your ability scores progress, your essences, but you are making choices that impact how they progress. And then those things kind of progress on their own. And every time your essence increases, you get to increase one of your skills. And almost all, in fact, no, all conflict resolution is tied to your skills. So combat is skill-based, driving vehicles is skill-based, negotiating is skill-based. Everything uses the same mechanic where you are rolling almost always at minimum 2 dice. One of them is your D20, one of them is your skill dice.
Okay. And you mentioned this thing has stair-stepping and...
Yes, the staircase.
And is this why this all the dice packs come with a weird coin?
Oh, the coin's the D2.
Oh. Fair.
So when you put a rank into a skill, you don't get a bonus. You upshift a die. And so at the base, when you have absolutely no skills, you're rolling 2d20 and taking the worst results because you have no skill and have no business attempting those checks. As you start training in those skills, you start getting either first a D2, then a D4, then a D6, D8, D10, D12. And then D12 is the highest you can get with just improving your ranks.
Mm-hmm.
But if the circumstances are favorable enough, you could get up to rolling 2d20, taking the better of the two, and rolling 3d6, adding them together. But that's like, you have to be a master in ideal situations to get that, which is why we didn't even include multiple d6s in the dice pack. But so this is a great game for people that do not like finicky math, because it really is all you ever have to do is take the d20 and take your highest skill roll and add them together. So you'll only ever be adding two numbers. And when I say the highest skill roll, that is because instead of increasing a die by one step, you can choose to specialize in an aspect of a skill. And this is where, as somebody who loves the feel of dice in my hands, this is where the system gets very exciting. Because let's say I've got a D6 in a skill and I'm specialized in it. That means that when my specialty comes into play, I roll all of those dice. I roll the D20, I roll the D6, I roll the D4, and I roll the D2, or I flip the D2 separate. So if I have a D12 and then I become specialized in it, like let's say I'm Snake Eyes, and we're talking about like my martial arts isn't a skill, so finesse, or yeah, let's say finesse. So let's say I'm Snake Eyes, a high level Snake Eyes, and I am specialized in finesse with my martial arts weapons, then I am rolling my D20 with a D2, a D4, a D6, a D8, a D10, and a D12. And I am looking through all of them, and I'm finding the highest one. And it is super satisfying, and one of my favorite things about this system.
That's not the highest single number. It's the D20 plus the highest of the other dice. Right.
Yeah, D20 plus the skill die, and in this case, the highest of those skill dice.
When I first heard the system, I thought like, well, isn't it all worthless till you get to a D12? Because how often is the D6 going to outperform the D20?
Right, yes. So the D20 adds to the skill die, but also it's very easy to critically succeed because all you need to do is get the max on a die. And so if you're rolling all of them, not the D2 is an exception, but if you're rolling all of them, that D4 still contributes, because if you roll a 4 on it, then you've critically succeeded, which is, in our case, an automatic success. It's not like double damage or anything, but it does mean that if you are a specialist in a field, odds are you are going to succeed.
Yeah, I'm trying, like, if you were, like, D8 in a skill, the math I'm doing right now that it at least isn't a crit is, like, under 50%.
If you have a D8 and you're specialized, you mean?
Yeah, and you're rolling the D8, the D6, the D4, the D2, the D20. One, it's very, 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 very likely one of those is going to hit.
Yes, agreed. So Sivakata's been making some great references to the old cartoon. He earlier was talking about Quick Kick's girlfriend, and it's true. Quick Kick at one point got a girlfriend. Amber, I believe, is his girlfriend's name. And she was suspected of being a Cobra spy. And then he finds her infiltrating a base on a mission, and he's like, aha, that proves it. But she was actually only infiltrating that base to prove she wasn't a spy. And she was caught trying to clear her name, and it all looked really shady. That was also the episode where Cobra Commander started lasering his face on the moon. Years before Chairhead Chipperdale ever tried that. All right, Lava Being is asking about pre-gens. That is actually something that was talked about, but I don't know if any pre-gens made it into the core rulebook. I haven't seen the final production version of the G.I. Joe core rulebook yet, so I'm not positive there. Okay. Lava Being, how many Cobra Troopers make up one encounter? 10, 20? All right, I'm going to reveal the Cobra Troopers have a perk called Bullet Stopper, and when they're on the same field as a higher ranking Cobra, you have to, the higher ranking Cobra gets a bonus to their defenses for every Cobra mook that's on the field. So basically, tactically, you'll want to take out the big threat, but when they're surrounded by 10 Vipers, and Vipers may be threat level 1, and you might be facing Dr. Mindbenders, like threat level 15 or so, these guys are basically just Dr. Mindbender's armor. So yeah,
this is why I love
any given encounter will have a whole bunch of Cobra low-level troopers.
So that's one thing I'm surprised about, that this is indeed a 20th level game, because usually when you see games trying to adapt this sort of play style, the power curve is much shallower. But how shallow is the power curve here? Like, how much more powerful is Dr. Mindbender compared to a level 5 Joe?
Quite a bit. Like, Mindbender could technically take out a Joe, not in a tank, but definitely a Joe on a motorcycle, even with that combined, like, boosted up, like, the combination of your character level plus the bonus for being on a vehicle. Dr. Mindbender is high enough level that he could take it out.
I thought the vehicles were just all made out of paper mache.
No, they've got toughness and stuff just like anyone else.
So do the Joes get an equivalent of bullet stoppers? Do we just get like lower rank NCOs that we can throw ahead of us?
So those would be the green shirts. So if you are flipping the script and you're playing as Cobra against G.I. Joe, then yeah, your Cobra troopers would turn into green shirts of different specialties, and they would have the bullet stopper rule as well. Not that, like, I don't imagine Scarlet would be weaving behind green shirts in the same way that I picture Dr. Mindbender doing that, but like they're valiantly trying to prove their worth to G.I. Joe by being like, no, we're the front line, and we are going to do whatever it takes to stop them from hurting you. You know, change the flavor, but the mechanics still work.
Somebody's got to be in those parachutes.
Exactly.
So that's a good question. There's lots of versions of G.I. Joe. Are we doing lasers or bullets?
So, I don't think it says anywhere. I know we're not counting ammo. That's for sure. If certain weapons will have a reload feature, which means you have to spend a round reloading it. But other than that, it's not like you have to carry around a certain number of magazines to keep track of that. So if that's because all the weapons are laser focused, sure, you can see it that way. It's really up to you. But in the same way, so defeat is what happens when you are reduced to 0 health. And that you can interpret as you're dead. You can interpret as you've been knocked out and taken captive. Whatever is most appropriate to your campaign.
I'm seeing on the cover, it's a mix. Duke has bullets. Definitely is using bullets. That is a very big laser. That is a laser crossbow. And I don't know that Fire Sword counts as laser or not.
So that is Roadblock's firing the breacher. So that's actually electricity. Or canonically, it's electricity. I agree. It looks more like a concentrated laser.
Anything glowing in a straight line of energy in the cartoon is laser. This is why Cyclops shoots lasers, even though he doesn't.
He shoots concussive blasts, right?
Right.
And I'm looking at, Scarlet, there is no sign. Oh, but she's got the quiver of crossbow, like of bolts.
They're not in there.
No, they're not. Well, maybe she just fired one.
The string is back.
Yep, all right. She's firing something without anything loaded.
You've got to use the string to rapidly shoot the laser out of the tip of that crossbow. Okay, I'm just goofing off. But this is another thing that's kind of important across all these games is there's an alt mode. There's the Megazord. There's my Hiss tanks. How does those vehicles play in this? Because good grief, if vehicles don't play into this, then I'm disappointed.
Yeah, so there are vehicles in the equipment chapter for Joe's and in the Cobra chapter or the Cobra Threats chapter. So yeah, you will definitely be playing with the vehicles. JoJo vehicles might be the most straightforward of the 3 games because it's just the Hiss tank. It works just like any other opponent in that, they've got their stats, they roll to hits, they can be destroyed in the same way that a trooper could be defeated. They're just bigger. So really, like, a Hiss tank takes the role of like a giant or a dragon in that it's a bigger threat, but it's still fairly straightforward to how do you manage them. Whereas Zords and the different alt modes in Transformers, again, being less familiar with those games and being less familiar with Power Rangers as a property, I believe the Zords, just from what I've seen from Day of Destiny, which is the Power Rangers live play that plays on Renegade, Zords, it basically is completely changing your mode. So it's almost like switching to a different character. but your character's skills still apply to how the Zord attacks. And that's how the vehicles work in G.I. Joe, that if you are sitting on a motorcycle, if you're riding a tank, if you're riding a Jeep, sometimes you can apply the vehicle's stats if it's got certain traits to it. Like if it's got an autopilot, you can use the vehicle's driving skill instead of your own driving skill. And other times it really is just like your character, but you're faster and you have an extra set of gun options.
Mm-hmm. So how does that handle the game balance then? Like, is vehicle encounters really just balanced by itself then? Like, there's his tanks, therefore we're going to give Joe's the other tanks.
So yeah, you've got different options in how to. There's basically 3 options. You can do soldier versus tank, where the soldier is the Joe. Soldier versus tank, where the tank is the Joe, and then you're just going to be mowing people down.
Right.
Not unheard of, but still.
Right.
And then there's vehicle versus vehicle. So all 3 work functionally the same way. It's just a matter of how which side is using the vehicle rules and which side is using the majority of the rules, which again is not super different. It's just little things like if your plane gets destroyed, here's a whole variety of rules for basically parachuting out of it and making sure you don't get hurt, and shooting from vehicles and things like that. But the option is there for both sides.
So in all 3 of the games, with Power Rangers especially, the Zord eventually becomes the Megazord, in which all the Zords become one giant robot. How does the party handle that? And of course, that same question is, what if my party are all combiners in Transformers, which has the same function? And G.I. Joe, there's lots of vehicles that take lots of Joes to pilot.
Okay, yes. So I could tell you the G.I. Joe version of that.
Right.
And that is that there is the crew stat. And if you have the full complement of the crew that's on there, and this includes like, here are the people that are actually operating it versus here's how many passengers it can carry. So yeah, if you have your full complement of crew, you've got a fully functional vehicle. If you have less than the full complement of crew, and it doesn't have autopilot, which mitigates some of the problems, then you are operating the vehicle at less than full capacity.
I don't get to shoot my spring-loaded launchers.
If you do, you're probably not moving, because you're moving from chair to chair.
Does it really have rules for jumping out of the cockpit, climbing across the tank, and jumping into the turret?
Yes. I mean, it's basically what position in the vehicle you're operating. Yes, there are. Like, if it was a his tank, the driver would have to get out of the cockpit, actually climb into the back. Assuming there's no like little door behind the driver that would facilitate changing the roles. But I think regardless of the actual presentation of the vehicle, the roles are pretty straightforward of I move from one chair to another.
Okay, I've asked a lot of questions. I'm
going back to chat to see what some of the questions are. What role is the mystic? So the closest thing to the mystic would be the technician. So if you are a skill specialist technician, that's the closest thing to a mystic or a lot of the spellcasters. I also have a lifeline build as a technician, and he is helping people all around the battlefield. What skill to break out of a nightmare, says Cicada. Well, that would be teamwork, which is not a skill, but it's what you got to do if Cobra has some kind of nightmare-inducing machine that is making the Joes just wake up completely tired. Oh, and then the other thing is, if you've got Lowlight on the team, he doesn't sleep, apparently, because he is so used to night terrors that he just became just one with the night.
Oh, somebody with night terrors, that's not how that works.
So the Lowlight episode where they have Dr. Mindbender is forcing nightmares on everybody is an amazing episode, and it's got a really cool story behind it where Buzz Dixon, who was the story editor at the time, met with somebody who was like underprivileged, and in talking to the kid, he realized that the only character this kid could relate to was the Dreadnoks, and that everyone else was like highly trained, highly educated. Even the Cobras were all like from rich families and whatnot. And he was like, well, no, that doesn't work. And so he specifically made Lifeline the son of an abusive father who is dealing with a lot of psychological trauma. And then this nightmare episode is Lifeline showing everybody else how it's like, oh, this is how you face your fears. This is how you overcome it. And like, there's some visceral moments where like they're all in this shared nightmare universe. Everyone's freaking out. There's a lot of like that weird stuff they got away with in 80s cartoons. And Lifeline's just screaming like, "Bring it on, you called it." Like it's a great episode and a great character episode, because Lifeline in every other scene up until that was just kind of this like quiet, monotone, mysterious sniper guy. And this is the first time we got to see him vulnerable and emotional. And anyway, just very good episode. And one of the reasons I am a big fan of the animated series. A lot of it is just silly stuff like Bazooka sees a sea serpent. But every now and then there's an episode like that where it's like, I felt that. I know these characters and I love them now.
All right, so time to get ready for playing G.I. Joe the RPG.
Yes.
Okay, time to do this. What do we watch? What do we watch? What do we read? Let's say we're like, a lot of our listeners are going to be, it's been decades since I Joed, or the last Joe I saw was Rise of Cobra or something like that. What is your recommended watch and or read list to get ready for G.I. Joe role-playing?
All right. Best thing to watch is G.I. Joe Resolute, which is an animated feature film, essentially. It was kind of cut up and released kind of like the Star Wars... Or no, sorry. The original plan was to release it like the Star Wars Clone Wars, where it was like between two episodes of a show on Cartoon Network, you would get this 2-minute episode of a like, here's a scene, and when you watch them all together, it comes out as a full thing. That was the plan. It never got released like that. It got released just all at once one night as a single movie, and then released as a DVD. And it was also uploaded legally by the Hasbro team to YouTube to be watched all in one sitting. And it's amazing for a lot of reasons. One, it really captures the essence of the characters, and it really feels like the original cartoon, but written for an adult audience. So it is about something's exploded. We need to go to 3 different parts in the world at the same time to get the 3 MacGuffins, put the 3 MacGuffins together to stop Cobra's plan. And every single time the teams they encounter Cobra, and they have to deal with, those Cobras in that situation. And so it's got all the main characters that you would think of. The background is just full of recognizable Joes with updated characters. Like, they made new versions of every single Joe that probably appeared on the Sunbow series. A lot of them speaking roles, even though there's like 5 voice actors in the entire thing. They do this amazing job of making the characters sound distinct. And you do have to kind of remember who these characters are enough when you go into it to really like ping like, oh, I recognize that character. I get why he's acting that way or saying that thing. It's got a great storyline between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. It's just, it is the best example of what the G.I. Joe universe is all about. The other thing, as far as reading goes, I would read the original Marvel series, had a second series called Special Missions. Each one is a standalone issue. Each one is just dealing with, here's a situation that we need G.I. Joe for. It's not always about Cobra, but it is a good variety of the characters, and it is actually very much formatted and paced the way you would want to run a one-shot for a G.I. Joe RPG.
So Resolute, I see this a lot with when video games get remastered or brought up, or HD remakes is what they used to call them before HD became passé, because now we all 4K now, where they try to make the game like you remember the game used to be. Because is this what Resolute is? This is how you probably remember Joe if it's been a while since you've watched Joe.
Yeah, that is exactly it. It is the rose-tinted glasses G.I. Joe. Not that I like, again, the original series has some great episodes, but it's one of those things where you just kind of have to watch a lot of them to really get to know the characters. And then you start picking up on the nuances, which make average episodes better. And there are great episodes that you kind of have to get recommended and specifically found. So like No Place Like Springfield, anyone can watch that and just absolutely fall in love with Shipwreck and be really caught up in that episode, regardless of how well you know the G.I. Joe world and the individual characters. But stuff like that, the Nightmare episode we were talking about with Lowlight, that is an episode that has as hokey a premise as a lot of the other episodes, and yet really delivers.
Is there like fan recommended watch orders out there somewhere?
No, because the G.I. Joe doesn't really have a meta plot in the original animated series. The second season kind of does, because it starts with Arise, Spectre, Arise, where they clone Serpentor from the DNA of history's greatest rulers. And then Cobra Commander is slowly trying to overthrow, or not slowly, but just he has the Starscream role on Transformers in that Cobra Commander's still around, but now he's the second in command. And anytime Serpentor screws up, he's the first person to point and be like, "Look, he's worse than me." And then at the end of the second season, there's an episode where Destro and Cobra Commander are working together against Serpentor. They're kind of conspiring against him, but that's like a B plot in an episode that's otherwise cross country. So it's called what's it called? Something like Into My Tent, You Silently Creep. And it's just about stuff has gone missing at G.I. Joe HQ. Then the Joes go out on the mission. Cross country is either especially invested in things going missing, because I think his tape deck went missing. And Cross Country is a stupid character, and this is a very shallow episode. And so he crawls into like air ducts, and he finds that Cobra has like amassed this like they've trained these rodents to steal things from G.I. Joe, hoping that they would get like mission valuable information, and they're not. They're just getting knickknacks from the G.I. Joe's lockers. And at one point, Cross Country beats Storm Shadow in a one-on-one duel. It is not a great episode, but it is the last episode in the second season. And because the G.I. Joe movie came out next, that's it. This is the last episode of the G.I. Joe animated series before the movie. And it shows that they had these plans that apparently in the future, Cobra Commander and Destro would be teaming up to take out Serpentor, even though Destro was involved in having Serpentor created to usurp Cobra Commander. And yeah, so if you watch the whole series in order, you go from that one episode into G.I. Joe the movie where Destro is totally on Serpentor's side again. Cobra Commander gets turned into a snake, and Cobra as an organization more or less falls apart. But for a second there, it looked like there was a meta plot emerging about Cobra Commander and Destro conspiring against Serpentor. But otherwise, you can watch any episode in this season in any order, with just a couple of exceptions of episodes that have sequels to previous episodes. Cicada, do we have Cobra Law stuff, alternate future stuff? I love wonky fun adventures. So here's the thing. In the G.I. Joe core rulebook, it is just military fantasy. But if you want to include some of the wackier things from the cartoon, you open up the threats chapter in the Power Rangers book, and you've got all of the monsters that you need. So in the second, or is it the third? Anyway, one of the mini-series before the first season, they Joes are deployed on a spaceship, and there are these cute little Ewok-type monsters that turn into these giant, like 10-foot monsters, and they're called Fatal Fluffies, and they're just flat-out monsters in the cartoon. So if you want something like the Fatal Fluffies, there's a lot of options in the Power Rangers rulebook that completely can translate into JoJo. Actually, oh wait, I got another example.
So wait, they're cross-compatible? The games are cross-compatible.
In that, yes, a threat will look like a threat regardless of what game you're playing. So here we go. Boom. This is a G.I. Joe action figure. Doesn't look like it. It looks like a Ninja Turtle, and if you're trying to find them, you're better off looking eBay in the Ninja Turtle section than the G.I. Joe section. But this is the Monstro Viper. It's one of the Mega Marines, and it is like this giant mutated Cobra Trooper that that Dr. Mindbender mutated. And so if you want this character in your... let me see if I can... I was going to say, let me see if I can find a G.I. Joe to show you the scale difference. Of course I can find a G.I. Joe. So there we go. Here's Crocmaster.
Ah, Crocmaster.
Yeah, I love Crocmaster. So Crocmaster doesn't even come up to his shoulder. So if you want the Monstro Viper, you are better off going into the Power Rangers threat section and carrying him over and making it a monster. Steve Kid is also talking about the Destro family monsters. So depending on which episode you watched, there are two episodes where we find out that Destro has a Lovecraftian cult and monsters in the basement of his castle. One of them, it is like a large-scaled octopus-type creature, but instead of a beak, it has an eyeball. But then in the second episode, it's like this gigantic cobra-like thing, and we're talking like kaiju-sized, and that came from the basement. So, yes, I think either of those monsters could be represented using stats from the Power Rangers rulebook.
He is well stocked.
What's that?
Destro is well stocked.
I think the second one destroyed... No, the first one destroyed the castle, or at least the fight over it destroyed the castle. And then the second one, they just kind of revisited the site. And Yeah, that came out. Oh, you know what? And Cobra Commander tried to take over it so that he could destroy Serpentor. And it's one of the few times that the Joes and the Cobras had to work together to take out a greater threat. And then likewise, if you want to do mechs or giant robots or whatever, you can bring some of the Transformers threats into the G.I. Joe, into your G.I. Joe role-playing game. And if you are doing Transformers and you want the local military to be taking out the Transformers, like there's a reason that they're robots in disguise. So yeah, the local military shows up. They just all happen to have the same stats as Cobra Vipers.
All right, so that sounds cool. I am dreading modeling the scale for these figures because, okay, Power Rangers and Joe don't cross over as often. Transformers and Joe have multiple amazing, officially made, if not canonical, crossovers.
I'm getting my latest.
I mean, the very first time I saw his tank turn into a Decepticon, I was happy.
So we talked about how Sunbow lost the license to the animated series after the G.I. Joe movie. Mm-hmm. There is a season, or there's an episode in Transformers Season 3, after they no longer had the rights to those characters, where there is a character called Old Snake, voiced by Chris Latta, very clearly is Cobra Commander in a trench coat. Like, this is the Old Snake action figure. Here he just happens to be flanked by a couple of transforming bats that were not from that animated series. But, and they talk about synthoids, which were the Destro's, or it might have been Zartan's clones. And so they transfer the minds of Hot Rod, Ultra Magnus, Springer, and RC into synthoid bodies. The episode's called Only Human because a bunch of Transformers are made into humans. And Cobra Commander's behind it. And at the end of the episode, he's even like, he starts saying, Cobra! And then he like coughs and loses it. So it's like, Cobra! All in their way of saying, like, we can't use Cobra Commander, but we're using Cobra Commander. And there's another character, Marissa Fairborn, who is the daughter of Flint and probably Lady J. And there's at least one episode where Bill Ratner voices a very Flint-like character talking to his daughter. And it's like, again, it's obviously Flint, but it's not Flint. So even non-canonically, there were these crossovers right from the original animated series. And then in the comics, every 5 or so years, there's a G.I. Joe Transformers crossover, to the point that at one point there was a G.I. Joe comic, not even like G.I. Joe meets Transformers, just the G.I. Joe comic had Thundercracker, the Decepticon Seeker, was a member of G.I. Joe.
I have fond love for the various cartoon series, including G.I. Joe Extreme, which I know you're not a fan of.
G.I. Joe Extreme, I have very little personal experience with. It came out at a time where I wanted more a real American hero, and so I resented it, and I just never went back to it.
Mm-hmm. But I really like where my Joe love was the original Marvel comic run, and then the various, especially the 2000 eras comics when those were being put out. That's where my Joe love falls.
Sorry, I was distracted. Getting a link to a cover of a comic with Thundercracker as a member of G.I. Joe. If you want to share that on the screen.
Oh, hold on.
So that cover, that's the G.I. Joe roster.
Where did you
on Facebook.
Facebook, okay. Stall for time.
All right. So, so you were saying something about that was your era of G.I. Joe and Transformers. So, I was not paying attention. So I was saying
my love for the Joes was founded in comics. Ever since, I wasn't even a fan of Joe until we have a thing here called Santa Train. In Appalachia, where just around Christmas time, a series of costume Santas, of course they're not supposed to be costume Santas, where Santa Claus himself gets on a train and just passes by communities where he will throw presents out the train anytime he sees a kid by the railroad tracks. And so when I was little growing up next to a railroad track, Santa Train was always wonderful. And the Santa always seemed to know what the particular kids on the route wanted, which was, of course, because Santa and not because it was a community member dressed up as Santa. And so Santa would often throw G.I. Joe toys, and more importantly, basically the entire year's worth of G.I. Joe comics that year would just like get thrown out in a sack in my direction.
Cool.
All right, trying to get
I'm
this up
going to
on
correct
screen.
myself, by the way. It's Skywarp. It's not Thundercracker. Thundercracker's the blue Seeker. Skywarp is the purple Seeker.
Okay, let's see here.
So, yes. So, my first exposure was the cartoon, and then is the action figures, and then it was years later that I got into the comics. So, actually, my first opportunity to get the comic was a very late issue where Storm Shadow, who at that point had defected to G.I. Joe's, in the late issues of the comic, he was brainwashed and rejoined Cobra. And I really resented that because I loved the Storm Shadow storyline, as told simply through the action figures. Because again, I hadn't read the comics at that point. And so I didn't want to read the comic because it was like, no, I don't want to read Storm Shadow as a bad guy. Storm Shadow's a good guy now. And then years later, that was one of the hardest issues for me to finally track down and get when I completed my Marvel run. But it was in like revisiting the Marvel run, I realized that that's kind of, it's another thing that it's got a lot of moments of brilliance, and it's got a lot of different, like defining moments for characters that may not have gotten any attention on the cartoon or just did not get the same kind of characterization. So, but it's also like the animated series in that there's a lot of just bad or basic storytelling in the comics. There's a lot of the characters have very similar voices. In fact, some of them use the same expressions. And so I know a lot of people think of like the cartoon as like Kitty G.I. Joe, but the comics was high art. No, the cartoon was for like 6 to 8 year olds, and the comic was for 9 to 10 year olds. And both, fun to look back on as an adult for different reasons, but neither one is the superior G.I. Joe in my mind.
Right. I mean, I love comic books, and was both previously a huge comic book fan, no longer a huge comic book fan. And 90s comics were fun, y'all, but they were for kids. They almost universally were for kids.
Sivakeda, are there bonuses for rhyming my character's speech? No, I don't want to encourage that behavior, so I'm not going to reward you for it. Because you can guarantee that by the time you sit down and start writing the dialogue to reply to an answer, to reply to a question, we're going to have moved on to the next question. And what you're going to be saying is just going to be gibberish. So yeah, if you are, a naturally lyrical person, then for sure do that. But I am not rewarding it. Plus, Roadblock only really he only rhymed in the first season. In the second season, he would punctuate his speeches with rhymes, but he had a lot more non-rhyming scenes.
So there's a lot of we can create Joes, and it's easy to have stats for Joe adjacent things such as Cobra.
Yep.
Does it give advice for how to run a Joe-like game?
Yes. Well, so there is a sample adventure in the core rulebook, and before that, there is a GMing chapter. But I guess the introduction is really what sets up the world and sets expectations. So, but yeah, so there's also, at the beginning, you'll get a mission from your mission liaison, and then you will go into the equipment requisition phase, which is something that's unique to the G.I. Joe book, although may have been borrowed for Transformers as well. So there is kind of like the formula for how you would follow it, and it's not strictly laid out like when you're running a G.I. Joe adventure, you have to do social scene in the pit, followed by you get your mission, followed by requisition scene, followed by you're out in the world on the mission. That's kind of the implied template for how the adventures would work, but it is really up to you how much you want to run it that way.
Like I was kind of hoping for even things like part of putting the adventure together in the GM session is, okay, now establish your B plot.
You know what? I don't think the G.I. Joe animated series had too many B plots. I think it was mainly, well, okay, so it was like, here is the action plot and then here's the character plot. Right. But it wasn't like, now let's cut back to this other character doing this other thing. I guess it was a lot in the miniseries where it was just characters all over the place, Snake Eyes is sacrificing himself to expose himself to radiation to put the valuable material into the canister, and then gets saved by that strange blind woodsman who has the cure for radiation exposure.
It's amazing how many characters pull a Spock.
Yeah. Sacrifice themselves. They get the bonus for, you get the kudos for this heroic sacrifice, but you don't actually have to stop showing up in the media.
I mean, I think the trope is called Disney death.
Oh, okay. I think Spock's the better example of it, though.
It is, but I don't get to name the
saying,
tropes.
Steve Akeda trying to figure out what the cryptic voice calling barbecue is. Well, it was the Viper, of course. The Viper is coming. That is another classic episode where it's like, is it classic because it's so bad it's good, or is it just such a fun, memorable premise that years later people still remember when Barbecue was getting these mysterious phone calls, and they all seem to be hints at Cobra plots, and whenever they show up, there would be a Cobra plot there, and Cobra was constantly like, how did you figure out this was our R&R resort in the Arctic, or that we were going to strike this random target? And it ends up it was all a coincidence, and that it was just a windshield wiper coming to Barbecue's new firehouse that he had bought as his like party hub for the Joes. And he just is accented. So when he was introducing himself as the windshield wiper, it was the windshield viper.
I want to know what the windshield viper
Grey Wolf says they freaking love that episode.
I mean, at a certain point, like, it's so terrible it's awesome, or so wonderful it's awesome, just the difference between those two things ceases to exist.
Lava Being, any tips for GMs on what types of plot Cobra is up to? So, low-level plots, you will probably want to do the secondary characters trying to do something to establish themselves in Cobra or to impress a higher-up. And that way, after you foil that scheme, you'll also have like the next higher-up that they were trying to impress. And so you can string that together into multiple different adventures into a campaign. But specific adventures, Cobra in the cartoon would kidnap a lot of scientists and try and develop a lot of doomsday weapons, or just like they would try and hatch the new scheme that G.I. Joe did not have a counter to. So that is a classic one. G.I. Joe, Cobra would also often go on the offensive, so you can just start it as, we need you to patrol this area. It's a standard mission. Just go on out there, report back when you find stuff. And Cobra somehow got wind of that and set up an ambush, and now the G.I. Joes have been cut off from the rest of the team, and they have to counter this ambush. Are they plotting to steal the Giza pyramids? They could be, if the Giza pyramids have some ultimate greater reason for Cobra to have them. Sometimes it's just something like bragging rights among the terrorists, and other times it's to develop something larger for countering G.I. Joe and taking over the world.
It's also important to remember that every session you do have to send one of the Joes to do the PSA, and indeed warn David that he needs to check the door when there's smoke in the house.
Yeah. Oh, and you do not jump your bike over live wires that have been cut down and fall. You got to call somebody about that to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Or wait until Roadblock shows up with his giant man catcher, basically, to move the poles safely.
Honestly, that actually should be part of the game. This is how you recruit new Joes in 10 years.
Steve Akeda is suggesting Battle of the Bands. Yes, so if you want to do a Cold Slither type episode where Cobra is hypnotizing people with subliminal messages in the backtrack of a rock and roll track that they release by a band that is actually the Dreadnoks in disguise. Absolutely. Actually, that's a fun way of breaking up your Cobra plots. Cobra is actually a thematically diverse evil organization. So if you want to mix things up, you can have Dreadnoks are just causing chaos and G.I. Joe has to respond to it. And then you can cut to, there's the Arashikage, the Red Ninjas, are up to something cloak and dagger, and so you have to do a lot of investigating. And then you can have the Extensive Enterprises, which is the white-collar criminals in Cobra, and they're up to some kind of evil business. And the biggest thing you have to deal with is the fact that everything they're doing is evil but legal, and you have to do the illegal but good thing.
Can I make a Joe lawyer?
Yes. I guess that would be a technician. It would be a technician skill expert. Culture would be the skill that you want to
Mhm.
specialize in. With
Joes need probably an army of lawyers to deal with everything that goes on in an
it's true.
episode. All the
Your name could
insurance
be
claims alone would be like an entire firm's worth of work.
red tape.
But then I'd be a spy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That is another way you can do it. So the spy is the social commando, and so you take advantage of people using your by schmoozing, basically. Oh, Lava Being is suggesting deposition as the name of your GI Joe lawyer. Actually, wait, is I think Spirit might have a doctor of law. Let me double check that. Spirit has a doctorate, which surprised me, and it is not a medical doctorate. Psychology. He's a doctor of psychology, which I really appreciated finding that out, because Spirit is one of those like, oh, look at the stereotypes in G.I. Joe character, and it is also one of the iconic characters. So finding out depth to his personality makes it feel better about still thinking of him as an iconic character while acknowledging he's also a problematic representation.
I mean, the file cards are so important to the G.I. Joe history. Like, I had the little green box with all of my file cards carefully cut out and filled into
Nice.
them, which I now, as a collector, horrifies me saying, but as a kid, I loved it.
Yeah. So when I was getting back into GI Joe in the late '90s, after I'm a teenager, and it's like this is something that I really liked as a kid, and it stuck with me. I want to re-explore it. And Yojo was this incredible resource, and it had all the file cards on there, and just reading all the file cards one after another was what really made me like, oh, there's a lot to this. This is why I've loved characters like Deep Six, who, he's just the deep sea diver guy before that, who had one of the worst action figures because he only had 2 points of articulation. But reading that he became such a good deep sea diver because he is so antisocial that the bottom of the ocean is where he went to get away from people. It's like, now I suddenly love this character. That is amazing. What an amazing character quirk. And they're loaded with them. A lot of, not so much the 1982, 1983 character file cards, because they were mostly like, trained at this academy, is an expert in these weapons. But after that kind of got stale, and there's a lot more about the individual personalities that are thrown in there, a lot of those personalities are fascinating character profiles and really fun. And often show up in the cartoon, but used in pretty subtle ways. It's not like they have the one episode establishing, here's Deep Six, here's his deal, he hates people. But the way he's written, he is an awkward, antisocial dude. And it's because if you also read the file card, it's like, oh, there's layers to this. And I'm actually learning, like, it's storytelling through multiple dimensions at the same time.
Yeah, G.I. Joe, that's one of the reasons I love the show and the comics, is it did do a lot of my favorite how I do characters in RPGs is the slow reveal, where the character has an obvious gimmick and then like a lot of depth and reason why the character got to his obvious gimmick, and to slowly reveal that to the other players through the course of a campaign. To it's how it rolls, and it's a great mechanic. And yeah, I totally stole that from Joe.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons I don't care or need for character backstories to be written out is because G.I. Joe did so much with so little. Like, the file cards were a paragraph or two. Like, I've talked about Backstop a few times. I love Backstop because they say birthplace, Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And it's like, there's a Canadian on G.I. Joe from my hometown. And then I read it, and he's kind of a jerk who got kicked out of Canada basically for necessary roughness in hockey. And it's like, I shouldn't like this personality, but because it says birthplace, Montreal, I have an attachment to this character. And it's just a little thing like that is what you cling to. And so that's actually also why a lot of those original 13 Joes who, there's 4 unique head sculpts across 13 characters. So you would think that there would be very little distinguishing them. But if you read their file cards, and especially their file names, there's a lot of ethnic diversity among the original 13 Joes, with like Zap is Hispanic and Clutch is Jewish. And like, this is just the kind of thing that if that is something that you needed someone to relate to, you spot that and you're like, oh, okay, this is my guy. And because G.I. Joe was very allowant in what characters were considered the main characters, you would just get like excited. It's like, oh, my guy's in this episode. It's not like the Ninja Turtles where it's always the same four guys.
Mhm.
G.I. Joe, it's like, of the 50 characters that could be in this episode, your character is in this episode this time, and you get excited for that.
This also sounds like it make all of these, but especially the Joe, sounds like it makes a really good con game. Like this would be a great game to prep to run at conventions.
So I cannot go into this, but I have an adventure that I'm writing that was it doesn't even have a home yet, but I am very excited for when I finally get to run this because it's super cool and it uses G.I. Joe lore in a fun way that if you recognize what I'm referencing, wow, that's really cool. If you don't reference it, it's still fine because it's really the way I'm applying it is really cool.
Also, an idea that immediately jumps to mind based on stuff you've talked about in the podcast before, especially on Private Sanctuaries before, is the multiple G.I. Joe option, but not just multiple Joes, because playing in a long 20 level campaign is a commitment. But what if you want to experience the breadth that G.I. Joe's? So having my players, okay, you get a 1st level Joe, a 5th level Joe, a 10th level Joe, and a 15th level Joe. Write them all. And then when it's time to go against Dr. Mindbender, the 15th level Joe show up. But
yeah, because that's the thing. Like the way that the threats are going to have to work is that low level, most of the ones that are in the core rulebook, and like I outlined a threat section for the JoJo book that would have been 300 pages just for getting all the Cobra characters out there, so that there was like, for every threat level, there was a random trooper, or sorry, a faceless trooper and a named character. And we had to narrow it down, and so we end up with a lot of low-level generic troopers and a lot of high-level recognizable Cobras. Right. So like, Cobra Commander had to be in the book, but he had to be the highest threat level, and so the odds are you're never actually going to face him.
Does he really need to be the highest threat level?
Yes.
I don't
even
see
if
much
Destrom's
evidence
the more
of that.
competent tactician.
Combatant?
Well, I mean, like, he uses his shrewdness and his manipulation.
All right.
But yeah, so if you are just excited to get some of those recognizable Cobras, if you've got a really killer Major Blood impression, and you're like, I really want to put them against Major Blood, but if I do that when they're 1st level, either Major Blood is not going to be nearly as powerful as he needs to be, or I'm going to destroy them. No, a good alternative to that is to have some medium and some high-level characters that they get to play as. Is it hard? You could do like a session where your first characters are based on the actual G.I. Joes, and you do something like 10th or 15th level, and you take out a high threat level recognizable Cobra character, and then the next session of the campaign you go to level 1, and these are the characters you're playing, and you've just introduced the world of G.I. Joe and got the like urge to play the G.I. Joe characters out of the way in the first session.
Can the first session be the equivalent to the G.I. Joe movie or Transformers movie where we kill off all the main cast and then they have to make new level 1s that nobody's seen before?
No. G.I. Joe only intentionally killed or intended to kill one character, and then they took it back.
Yes, right. But would that be an interesting way to open the game?
Yes, it would be. You can definitely knock Duke into a coma in the first session.
Yeah. Or
I mean,
if we do the movies, we can kill Duke in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, he also gets killed off in at least one comic series. It's become the thing to like, you want to set a tone, kill Duke. Seems to be the only character that it's like, we're going to kill him off because he's the one that matters. But yeah, Seaver Kid is talking about the Transformer movie deaths. Yeah.
Oh, those
people talk about Optimus Prime, but nobody talks about the 5 or 6 beloved characters getting wiped out like it's an afterthought.
Like Megatron storming the spaceship is the one that always traumatizes me. It's just like, oh my gosh, no, this looks horrifying.
Prowl's eyes dimming and smoke coming out of his mouth.
Oh my gosh. It's like nothing Michael Bay did shocked me at that point because we had been through real trauma before.
Yeah.
Oh. Mm-hmm. All right. Is it one last question from me? Yeah. You mentioned the threat thing. Is it easy to make our own threats, like to make our own lower level Cobra faces to go up against?
Yeah, well, so the easiest is just to make it like you're making a PC, and then the jamming section does talk about like these are the things to keep in mind for a threat versus a PC, and it also talks about good ways to reskin things. So like we don't have all the dreadnoks in the book, but we do have someone called a dreadnok, some adjective. I know there's a dreadnok brute if you want to make a road plig type character, and the dreadnok. I'm not remembering the bruiser maybe. Anyway, so there's a generic version of the dreadnok, and if you want to make buzzer specifically and ripper and torch, you take that, you just change up their equipment, and the equipment chapter gives you the flexibility to make any of their weapons. And same thing, like we don't have a dreadnok motorcycle, but we have the ram, and so if you just want to paint the ram purple and teal and call it a dreadnok motorcycle, you totally can. It's not like Hasbro didn't do the exact same thing.
But there's not like a detailed monster creation system.
There is not. I just feel like that would, if we ever do just an Essence 20 book, that would probably give more background into how to customize it so that you as the GM can be running things that you've created. But because it's licensed, we want to be the ones that have the keys to that kingdom.
Right. Well,
any of the other products you want to go over, or we could just letting people know that this is expected to deliver in February. You can currently pre-order on RenegadeGameStudios.com. You can pre-order the G.I. Joe role-playing game core rulebook, Power Rangers core rulebook, the Transformers core rulebook, GM screens for all three, which come with adventures, dice bags, and dice sets for all three. The Power Rangers one, you even get a variety of options in what you can get out of them.
it does seem like the Power Rangers got the big ticket.
I have a feeling that Power Rangers is the most valuable of the three brands, and so there is that. But also, I think it's also the easiest to custom because, like, the dice sets, it's in each of the different colors for the different Power Rangers, and so that's really easy to do. Whereas if we were going to translate a dice set for each of the roles in G.I. Joe, it's like a Commando dice set, maybe black and red with the Arashikage logo, an officer dice set like brown with yellow because that's Duke's shirt and hair color. Like it's less self-explanatory what you would do with them, and I don't know how many people would be really dying to get that Duke dice set. Whereas if you were playing the Red Ranger and you have the option to get the Red Power Rangers dice set, yeah, you're getting the Red Power Rangers dice set.
Absolutely. Especially since like Power Rangers, the different generations, there was always a Red Ranger green. Like the colors occasionally changed, but there's a fairly good chance that you could be the next Green Ranger just because this time you're pirate ninjas. Actually, it's going to be really hard to come up with a theme for a Power Ranger crew that hasn't been done before.
There's a couple of questions in chat I'll cover. So Siva Keda is asking, how was writing in this new space? It was amazing. So first of all, designing the system with the talented group of designers, which I've now pulled up their name and lost it, but at least I know where it is. There we go. So Essence 20 was designed by myself, Ben Heisler, who worked on the G.I. Joe book with me, Gabriel Hicks, who worked on Transformers, I believe, Paige Lightman worked on G.I. Joe with me, JF Sombrero was on Transformers. Brian C.P. Steele was on Power Rangers. TJ Storm was on Power Rangers. Elisa Teague is the senior producer of role-playing games, and she worked primarily as an author on Power Rangers, but worked on all three of those books and is the person we report to. And then Eddie Webb, who worked on Transformers. So the meetings where we were just ironing out the system and addressing individual complaints, and then whenever someone would present a new idea, the people on a different brand would be like, okay, but here's how that applies to our brand. Like at one point, Brian was suggesting that we just have gun in the equipment, and it's like, if we just have gun, what is anyone even doing in G.I. Joe? And so so it was like, you could have gun in yours, and we'll have pistol and rifle, and we'll have like the more detailed system, because it is our superpower selection, basically, is what our equipment is. So
Right.
those were the kind of things that they were fun, and it was fun to see how all these different people that have so much different experience with different games. And I was the only one with extensive Pathfinder experience, so I was often coming in with the crunchy solution, and people are just like, "That's complicated." It's like, no, it's just a system that needs to be learned so that you can understand a part of the game. And then once you understand it, you go forward, and it's great.
Yeah. It's fun that Pathfinder, in the grand scheme of things, Pathfinder is one of the more complicated of the popular systems out there. But from my background in RPGs, especially that I didn't come into RPGs via D&D, it's like not even in my top 10 list at all. And it's weird that the space in the industry has changed so much that currently Pathfinder is the complicated game. And I'm like, you all never suffered through Champions.
Yeah, it's more elegant in how it's complicated. And so Essence 20 is far less crunchy and systematic than Pathfinder and the D20 system that we grew up on, or not grew up on, but like that we mostly experience. But I think that I did influence it to make it a little gamier than they originally expected, but also there's a lot of narrative elements into it. And again, if you've watched Day of Destiny, the Power Rangers RPG, actual play on the Renegade channel, that is a great example of like how this system runs so smoothly and can be so story focused, and then when combat happens, it's a really simple switch over to making sure that things are more mechanical. I really like that actual play, and it shows that this is how you apply that system to a Power Ranger story, where there's a lot more getting into who the characters are individually and what their life is like as teens, whereas G.I. Joe, you kind of scrub your personal life and you are just a G.I. Joe. And so it will play out very differently. And then Transformers, they're transforming robots, which will also play very differently.
Right. I am curious, between the two games, which has the more advanced martial arts system, Power Rangers or G.I. Joe?
So Power Rangers is enhanced by powers, which is something that G.I. Joe barely touches on. Like threats will have powers because it's shorthand for this is what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, there's a whole chapter of that book that is just not in G.I. Joe, and I suspect Transformers will have something similar. They'll use powers a lot, and G.I. Joe does not.
Yeah, I'm just like, but the Power Rangers, the Rangers themselves very rarely actually use any special powers. It literally is just a whole bunch of karate, and then one power gets used, and then giant robots show up.
One more question I'm going to pull, because Raising Rude Lords was asking if the system was inspired by the polyhedral system we were excited about a couple of years ago that uses D4 for skills. You are not good at it. D12s for skills. You are. I think he's talking about the excellence, and that's not exactly how that works. How did you have that in both hands?
But I think there's two games that this could apply to. I think they are thinking of the excellence, because this is the one I talked up a couple of years ago. And it's not that the D4 is the skills you're good at. Your character is a D4. Your character only has one dice, and it's determined by what kind of princess you are. And the D4 is the better dice to roll to do certain things than
because certain things,
other.
It's the range of 1 to 3. And so
Right.
if you have the D4, you're probably getting 1 to 3 all the time. But if you have the D12, there's only a 25% chance you're getting 1 to 3.
Right.
Yeah, that is such a clever system, but completely different from Essence 20.
Right. So like if you want to sword anything, which, you know, is important when you want to sword something, you have to roll a 4, 5, 6, or 7. And if you're the D4 character, it's a hard roll. But if you're the D8 character, you're having a great time.
And I just chuckled because Siva Keda is saying he hopes that Transformers has the most elaborate martial arts system of the 3 games.
I'm trying
to... It does not. Almost. Yeah, there's a couple... he showed up in one of the movies voiced by Ken Watanabe, but I don't remember the character's name. It might be Blitz?
Yeah, but like Blitz... Like that's not like a memorable character. Like he does not play much of a role in the cartoons or comic.
Right.
Like I said, Michael Bay stuff is Michael Bay stuff that is completely different from the other stuff.
Drift.
And And then there's like lots of post-comic stuff that has ninjas in it. Lots of ninjas show up later. But in the core, if the Transformers is like you're describing G.I. Joe, where it's the most recognizable version of the canon, then there should not be a lot of ninja robots.
No, I don't expect Drift. Well, you know what? There might be some kind of role option for the like a more stealthy, speedy type character. So like Mirage,
sure.
You need to be able to make Mirage, and if you give Mirage a sword, yeah, all right, Mirage is a ninja.
But Mirage isn't going to be doing flip kicks.
No. I have a plan for my Transformers character. I want to make him a Zamboni. And I want him to have a face like the hockey mask, so like a Jason Voorhees type face. And when he breathes, just the steam comes out of the holes in it. And he's got 2 weapons. One of them is a hockey stick shaped rifle. One of them is a hockey stick shaped axe.
It's not the same weapon?
It could be the same weapon. That's a good point.
It's like, well, I mean, like it could usually be like the energy. It would have to be like an energy hockey sword axe, kind of like the energy axe Optimus uses.
So I figured it would either be ice, like a cold-based weapon because hockey, or it would be a fire-based weapon because that's what Zambonis do. They melt the ice to smooth it out. You know, it would be steam rather than fire, but like it's one of those 2 options. Energy would definitely play into it.
And that has me questioning because scale is an interesting concept in these games, and probably most in Transformers, where the size of bot you are drastically differs. And I'm curious how that game's going to handle that. Because like you could be this big or a city.
Yes. Yeah, and like the way Power Rangers handle scale, it's really like most people are this big, and then sometimes you'll get a monster that's this big, and then the monster gets this big. Like there's the sharp increase, but that's also where the Zords come in. And so it's like you're just playing in the 2 scales, and you don't usually mix the 2 scales too much. Transformers will be mixing the 2 scales.
Right. And that's honestly what I expected G.I. Joe to mean. Like the answer to be with G.I. Joe and vehicles is that it's kind of like Starfinder and Robotech and other games that have giant robots, Battletech and stuff, where it's like there's on foot mode and then there's vehicle mode, and people versus vehicles usually means a bad time for the people.
So I know somebody in chat mentioned combiners earlier. It might have been Sivakeda. Combiners comes up often as like, oh, are there going to be combiners? And I believe the answer is no. But my answer is, what if there were? How do you want to play on ARM? Like, why is combiners are cool action figures?
That is an odd question to ask for a company making the Megazord.
Yes, okay, that's true. But even like, the Megazord still has the control room where all the characters are talking and making decisions, whereas a combiner kind of becomes a unique personality made up of what was 5 unique personalities or 6. And
wow,
so,
they were Steven Universing before Steven Universe.
Sure, and I'm sure there was somebody doing that before Transformers. So yeah, it's just funny that like, yeah, what if there are, like, I know people are saying like, oh, are there beasts or is it only vehicles? And it's like, I get the appeal of wanting to make sure that you can be an animal versus just a machine. Well, not, you're a machine, but like an animal alt mode versus a machine alt mode. But whenever somebody asks about combiners, and it happens almost all the time, it's one of the first questions, and it's like, what does it benefit you if you can become 1/5 of a larger robot?
You're right. Somebody did do it before Transformers, and it was Wizard of Oz.
What?
Tin Woodsman's origin story, where he's cursed by the witch to cut off each of his limbs with his axe, and then replace them with 10 parts. But then eventually she takes the parts and makes a new person called Phytor.
Oh, okay. I wouldn't say that's the same as a combiner, but
I combined this foot and got a new person with a new personality.
What's the Ship of Theseus? That's the original Ship of Theseus. Actually, no, I guess the Ship of Theseus predates the Wizard of Oz by decades. But it's the second Ship of Theseus, the Tin Woodsman and Phytor. Raising Rune Lords. I'd play an arm and give everyone the middle finger and do nothing else. So I'm sure that combiners are on deck for Transformers, and kind of like how G.I. Joe, like you can have all 5 players in the same vehicle controlling different parts. I'm sure there will be some kind of what the player experience version of those rules, and not just one person is now in charge. Oh, and did Phoenix 3 will be the head.
I think that's a great place to wrap it up.
Thank you for joining us for the latest episode of Geek Together, the No Direction Network's Positively Geeky podcast. I guess let's do a Patreon plug.
Yeah, if you want to help the network out, and we very much appreciate it, you can do so by contributing to our Patreon over at patreon.com/nodirection, or you can visit the Patreon link at nodirectionpodcast.com. And we have a special bonus for our patrons. After every episode of No Direction, you can participate in the after party, the Patrons Private Sanctum, where we talk about what our patrons want us to talk about live on our Discord server. If you just need to connect your Discord account to your Patreon account to gain access, and then you can join us, as well as the recordings are available at patreon.com/nodirection. While you're over there, you'll also find the Discord link at nodirectionpodcast.com, as well as the other amazing shows that we do on this network. We put out new podcasts and blogs every day over at nodirectionpodcast.com, and we would love for you to check out what we're offering, because most of it's free. Almost all of it's free. If it's not Private Sanctum, it's free.
This was kind of a preview of an upcoming podcast that we're going to be launching in January, all to coincide with the Essence 20 role-playing game when it launches. Param and I will be doing an Essence 20 related role-playing podcast, very much in the same style as No Direction. We have not figured out a lot of the details. We don't have a name. I know Param is looking for a theme song for it, but for now, this is an idea. We both know these brands very well. We know role-playing games, and once Essence 20 comes out, we'll both know this system very well. And I look forward to geeking out about it with you, Param, on a regular basis once again.
Yes, excellent.
Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
And we're all geeks. Let's geek together.